Hello, everyone, and welcome to my thoughts on The Last of Us TV show, Episode 4. And this one is called Please Hold On to My Hand, which is a lyric from the song Alone and Forsaken by Hank Williams. As always, the first part of this video will be spoiler free in case you haven't seen the episode yet or played the game. And after that, I will dive deeper into the episode and discuss all the juicy details. But I will give you a warning before I do that. All right? Let's get into it. So, guys, here's the main thing I didn't like about this episode. It was only 45 minutes long. Seriously. That's my number one complaint. This episode is the shortest one so far, and boy, did it feel short. It was a great episode, though. I loved it. There was, of course, some changes made from the game, but I actually liked all the changes. And for once, at least to me, it was the canon lines from the game that threw me this time. There were a couple of spots in this episode where the characters spoke lines directly word for word from the game. And I didn't really care for it as much as I thought I would. I found myself wishing they'd just written different lines. I guess it's kind of the same maybe as when you learn a song from a particular album and it's one of your favorite songs and you know every note and tone by heart and it's the only version of that song you ever hear. And then years later, you hear a different version of the song or a live version or whatever. And it just, grates on your ears a little bit. You know what I mean? Not because it's not as good, but because it's different from what you're used to. That's what it's like when I hear the game dialogue spoken in the show. It's not that it's not done well, it's just that it's not what I'm used to. And I'm biased toward the game, of course, and so I naturally feel like the line delivery is better in the game. And so because of that, I almost wish that they just didn't put any of the actual game dialogue word for word in the show. They don't do it very often, but when they do, it just kind of distracts me. Anyway, it's a tiny nitpick, but it stood out to me in this episode the most, so I thought I'd mention it. And maybe I'm the only one who feels this way about it. Let me know down in the comments if you kind of have the same feeling about the canon dialogues. Yeah. Anyway, now back to the review. This was the episode that I have been waiting for since day one. It's just a good old Ellie and Joel episode, something we should have had before now. And this is the first episode that we can really see Ellie and Joel shine as characters. I love all their interactions, and you can see their relationship beginning to blossom as well. And it had a surprising amount of humor in it too, which I loved. I like Ellie even more in this one. She feels even more like Ellie. Lighthearted, looking on the bright side, tough, but vulnerable and scared too. And Joel is great. He just feels like Joel to me. I don't even see Pedro Pascal when I watch it. I see Joel. But he's a more nuanced Joel, if that makes any sense. He's got more going on than just being a hardened survivor. I've seen some people say that they think the TV show Joel is weaker than the game Joel, but I disagree. I think he's more human. Game Joel has a lot of nuance, don't get me wrong. He's far from being just the typical video game protagonist tough guy. He's got demons and feelings and fears. But I think the show does a better job of actually showing us that than the game does. And of just showing us that Joel is a human being. He may be more vulnerable in moments, but that doesn't make him weak. It makes him human. And I can appreciate that. I mean, in this episode, we actually get to see Joel laugh in a sheer moment of catharsis, and I loved it. Game Joel never laughs, although I always thought there were moments where he could have, This episode is a really nice mix of traveling, conversations, peril, action, and foreshadowing, and it ended on a cliffhanger, which I had a feeling it would. So now I'm super eager for next Sunday so I can watch episode 5. It's been a long time since a week has passed so slowly for me. I found myself eagerly waiting for the next episodes. Anyway, this episode is probably my favorite one so far. In fact, my husband and I watched it twice in one night because we both just loved it that much. That could have also been because it was so short and we just weren't done by the time it ended. We wanted more. I honestly hope the next one is longer. Anyway, that's about all I have to say about the episode without giving away spoilers. So I think I'll switch over to spoiler talk now. So stick this video in your watch later if you don't want to be spoiled. But don't forget to come back and watch the rest after you've seen the episode. And I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below too. Okay, let's get into it. This review will be roughly scene by scene this time, but I won't mention every detail, just ones that I really liked or that stood out to me or even bothered me. So there are no flashbacks in this episode. So the first one with no flashback. It starts with Ellie in an old restroom looking at herself in the mirror. She's playing with the gun that she got at Bill's house in the previous episode. And it seems she knows a little bit about guns, at least. She knows how to eject the mag and the chambered round and to put the bullet back in the mag. That's probably more than most people know what to do with a gun. And we do know that later she says that she learned how to handle a gun in Fedra school. So anyway, she goes outside where we see that she and Joel are at an old gas station somewhere off the interstate in the middle of nowhere. Joel is busy siphoning gas from all the old cars. Ellie pulls out the joke book that she has in the game. No pun intended. Volume 2 by Will Livingston. In the game, she reads from this book a couple different times, and they even have the same jokes in the show as in the game. In the game, Ellie reads from this book the first time when they're in the hotel lobby in Pittsburgh. But since the show already had that hotel in episode 2, and Joel and Ellie weren't friends enough for lightheartedness back then, they didn't put it in there. But where they did have the jokes in this one was perfect anyway. In fact, the show has really great bookends, starting with Ellie reading a joke as she and Joel are getting ready to go to sleep, and ending with the same. It's just the right amount of humor and lightheartedness that the episode needed to balance the heaviness and seriousness of the rest of it. And it provided a way for Joel and Ellie to bond a little bit. In fact, it almost serves as a way to measure Joel's feelings about Ellie from the beginning of this episode to the end. The first time Ellie reads him a joke, he acts annoyed and tells her to stop. The second time, he plays along and even smiles. The third time, he outright laughs. It's a great way to show the character growth, and I loved that. We get a bunch of driving scenes where we get to see a lot of the abandoned countryside. They did such a good job showing us a broken down, overgrown world. Joel and Ellie have conversations while they're driving. Ellie asks Joel about Tommy, and so we get a bit of backstory for Tommy and Joel that we don't get in the game, so that was nice. That's one thing I actually really appreciate about this show, is that it fleshes out things more, gives us more information about the characters and the events before the outbreak. It's new information about characters that I love, and even though it's basically exposition, I don't find it boring at all. I could seriously listen to a 3-hour-long episode of Joel just narrating the apocalypse. Anyway, then we get a scene that's from the game, and it's also word for word from the game. The scene where Ellie gives Joel the Hank Williams tape, and then she looks at the dirty magazine and Joel tries to stop her. The only part that's different in the show's version is that Ellie doesn't look at the comic book first. Not sure why they left out that detail. It's kind of an ongoing thing in the game where Joel knows that Ellie loves comic books because of this scene, and so whenever he finds one, he picks it up to give to her. I guess they're not going to have that detail in the show, which I think is kind of a shame. But this is one of the scenes I was talking about where it was word for word the same lines as in the game, but it just felt wrong because they weren't delivered the same way as it was in the game. It's a great scene in the game and on most people's top favorite scenes list, but I think it might have been better if they didn't put it in the show, or at least wrote it slightly different so we wouldn't be able to compare the two versions so closely. You know what I mean? I feel like the scene from the show needed to be able to just stand on its own more. I also found it odd that they included it after having a very similar scene at the end of episode 3. Which I thought was basically the show's version of this scene, where Ellie gives Joel a tape when they're driving in the truck and they play it, and Joel gets all nostalgic, except it's a different song than the one in the game. And of course, they didn't have the dirty magazine, and I was totally fine with that. I was totally fine with the alternate version that the show gave us at the end of episode 3. But then they went and gave us the one from the game anyway in this episode. So Ellie gives Joel another tape that they play in the truck, and Joel finds to be nostalgic. I honestly don't think they needed to do it twice. It felt repetitive to me. And the fact that the line delivery was kind of jarring just made me not enjoy it as much as I would have if it had been different, I think. So, anyway, then Joel and Ellie make camp for the night, which is where we get the second joke book scene. Only Joel actually plays along this time, guessing the punchline and telling it back to Ellie. He also smiles, I think probably for the first time since Outbreak Day.
Joe!
What?
Can I ask you a serious question?
Yeah.
Why did the Scarecrow get an award?
Because he was outstanding in his field?
You dick! Did you read this?
No. Now go to sleep.
He also comforts Ellie, or tries to reassure her at least, that they're safe and no one will find them there because she was worried about that. But you can see that he doesn't believe his own words as he looks at his rifle, and then later we see him standing up keeping watch. He can't sleep because he knows what's out there, and he has to keep Ellie safe. The next day, there's more driving and more conversation, this time about their route and their destination. And they arrive to Kansas City, which is a location that they don't go to in the game. They've basically taken everything that happens in Pittsburgh in the game and put it in Kansas City instead. Not sure why exactly. I guess the city really is irrelevant. Maybe they just wanted them to get a bit farther along on their journey before losing the truck and all their supplies. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. The reason they go through Kansas City is the same reason they go through Pittsburgh in the game. The interstate is completely blocked, so they have to get off and go through the city to get around the obstacle. And in the process, they're ambushed by hunters. And they crash their truck and have to run and fight for their lives. However, in the game, the hunters are just nameless bad guys for the sake of cannon fodder, right? For the show, the creators wanted to humanize the hunters more. So we're given two new characters, Kathleen, played by Melanie Linsky, and Perry, played by Jeffrey Pierce, who is also the voice actor for Tommy in The Last of Us game. And according to IMDb, these characters will be in 3 episodes, so they'll be in Kansas City for a while, which is true in the game too. It's the longest sequence in the game, I think. So Kathleen is this ruthless leader of a resistance movement that took over the Fedra QZ in Kansas City, and now she rules with just as much dictatorship as Fedra did. Kind of gives us a glimpse of how things might go if the Fireflies actually won their war with Fedra, huh? Yeah. The show cuts back and forth between Joel and Ellie and these hunters. You find out that Kathleen is looking for Henry. Yeah, the same Henry from the game. It seems like she knows Henry. Like, Henry was a part of their group, maybe, and ratted out Kathleen's brother to Fedra, and they beat him to death. And so now she's on some sort of revenge quest against Henry. This is a departure from the game, where Henry and his brother Sam are just visitors passing through, or rather trying to pass through the city. They were from Hartford, Connecticut, and were traveling with a larger group to find the Fireflies. They stopped in Pittsburgh to look for supplies, but got separated from their group when the hunters attacked. They're supposed to meet up with the rest of their group in a radio tower on the other side of the city. So not sure why the show is making Henry and Sam part of this hunter group, but it sounds like he might also be part of a subgroup that is rebelling against the tyranny of Kathleen, or maybe he was loyal to Fedra if he ratted out Kathleen's brother to them. It's hard to tell from the scant dialogue we've gotten about it so far. I'm sure we'll learn more in episode 5. Maybe they just wanted a more personal connection and motivation for the characters, and that's fine. We'll see how it goes. The rest of the episode now consists of Joel and Ellie fighting and hiding from the hunters, but none of the scenes are the same as in the game. I mean, Joel doesn't even throw a single brick. I mean, come on. They do have a version of one of the important scenes from the game, but it's very, very different. It's the one that I detailed in my review of episode 2. Where they're in the hotel in Pittsburgh in the game, and Ellie saves Joel's life by shooting a guy that's trying to drown Joel. Then Joel gets mad at her for disobeying him and for using a gun after he said she couldn't. Then later on, Joel gives her a rifle, with which to cover him as he scouts ahead, and after she proves herself with a rifle, he gives her a pistol for her very own. And it strengthens the trust and bond that they've been building slowly throughout the game. The show has the same outcome for this scene, but it goes about it quite different. For one thing, Joel and Ellie are never separated like in the game. And the guy who tries to kill Joel isn't drowning him, but rather choking him with his shotgun against Joel's throat. And Ellie doesn't actually kill the guy, but she does shoot him, like in the hip or something, and Joel is freed. The guy begs for his life in a most prolonged and pitiful way. And it really paints these hunter guys as they're not all just like these tough bad guy dudes like they are in the game. This guy, he's a teenager, and he wants them to take him back to his mom, and he's just really pathetic, and he's scared to death. So what they're just trying to do is humanize the bad guys. Or maybe they're not even bad guys, they're just trying to survive as much as Joel and Ellie are. Anyway, Joel takes Ellie's gun and makes her go behind the wall out of sight, after which he kills the guy by stabbing him through the heart. And Ellie is terrified and horrified, and she cries. She doesn't let Joel see her cry, but she's just totally sickened and horrified over the whole thing. And Joel doesn't get mad at Ellie for using a gun after he repeatedly said no. He doesn't get mad that she didn't stay put where he told her to, like he does in the game. And a little bit later, once they have a moment to breathe, they have a heart-to-heart talk that doesn't happen in the game. Joel regrets that Ellie had to take such violent action, and he blames himself because he failed to protect himself. He's not mad at her, but rather at himself, and he tells her he's sorry that she had to go through that. And he tries to reassure her by saying that he knows how it feels to have to hurt another person like that for the first time. And it's not fair that she had to go through that at such a young age. Anyway, even though this scene is vastly different from its counterpart in the game, changing even the temperament and reactions of Joel, I think it works for the show. And here's why. In the game, Joel and Ellie, while definitely not friends through the first part of the game leading up to the scene, they are not enemies or antagonists with each other. They get along fairly well, with only a little bit of strife now and then. So the game actually needed that tension between them. However, the show has had that tension between them from the beginning. You know, to have just more of it here would regress the characters, I think, and would have just given us more of the same. You know what I mean? And by episode 4, we really just needed to see some progress in the Joel and Ellie dynamic. We needed to see them bonding and learning to trust and understand each other. And that's what we got instead of more bickering and chips on shoulders. And I really, really appreciated that. And so did Ellie. She actually tears up at Joel's words of comfort and understanding. You can tell she really appreciates his words and his apology. And we can see Joel's fathering side coming out in this scene. He doesn't want Ellie to have to go through pain and hardship. He wants to protect her from that, just like he did in episode 3 with the skeletons on the roadside, just like he would have done with Sarah. True, Joel still outwardly insists that Ellie is still just cargo to him, but we can tell that that's not completely true anymore. He's starting to care about her, but he still doesn't want to admit it to himself. I love this scene. And I think it's great because it's different from the game. It had more emotional impact that way, in my opinion. If they had just recited the lines from the game verbatim, then I think it would have fallen flat because it would have just been a copy. And like I said before, a copy that wouldn't have been bad necessarily, but different. And so automatically not as good. And I honestly hope that they treat more of the important scenes this way. I think it just worked. And this scene did a great job showing us that Joel has come to the dreadful realization that no matter how much he wants to protect Ellie from experiencing the horrors of this world, he can't. The fact is that violence is a part of that world, and depriving Ellie of a weapon will not prevent her from experiencing those horrors and potentially being scarred by them. And so he shows Ellie how to hold the pistol correctly. And then he gives it to her. And Ellie is so thrilled. Joel won some serious points with Ellie in this scene. He proved himself to be a brave defender, an understanding father figure, and he bestowed trust upon her in regards to the gun. Ellie likes Joel now, and it's obvious. And it makes me actually look back on the first two episodes with a different perspective. Like I said back then, my opinions in these reviews are based only on the very first viewing of an episode, and they may change as the story progresses. And I said I would mention it if my opinions change at all. Well, I think they're changing about Ellie in the first two episodes. Episode 3 and 4 have shown us the real Ellie. Episode 1 and 2 showed us Ellie in a stressful, scary situation, surrounded by rough strangers she didn't know if she could trust, and she had her walls up big time to protect herself, right? But as soon as she started feeling safe and able to trust Joel, she dropped those walls right quick. True, it's not how Ellie in the game behaved, but it still makes sense for the character in the show, just like the way Joel behaves in the show makes sense for him, even though it's different from Joel in the game. So, I don't really dislike Ellie anymore. I think Bella Ramsey is doing a great job playing her. In fact, I just recently rewatched the first episode, and Ellie didn't bother me like she did the first time. Perspective makes a difference in how you view things, that's for sure. Anyway, then we go back to Kathleen, and she's trying to zero in on Henry's whereabouts. Her people have found the men that Joel killed, and Kathleen thinks they're from Henry's group, or maybe Henry called them in on the radio for backup. Prior to this, she was interrogating one of her own people, who is also a doctor, and when Kathleen sees the wounded man that Joel shot and finds out he won't survive, even with the doctor, she goes back to the doctor she's got locked in a cell and shoots him. I found that to be a little bit stupid. I mean, I get that she's really angry and vengeful, and she sort of blamed the doctor for what happened to those men, even though it wasn't his fault at all. But seriously? You're going to freak out and shoot probably the only doctor in town because you're angry? Seems like you could restrain yourself for the benefit of your community, right? It's not like real trained doctors grow on trees in this world. I honestly don't find Kathleen to be very convincing as a ruthless leader. I mean, Melanie Linsky just has a soft, non-threatening voice, even when she's trying to be tough. I just have a hard time believing that she would be commanding and intimidating enough to lead a rebellion full of tough guys. Maybe she could. I'm not saying it's impossible. It's just not very convincing. If Tess were in this same position, I would totally believe it, though. She has the presence and authority to make it believable. I just don't think Kathleen does. I never felt afraid for that doctor that she's interrogating. I knew she was going to kill him from the very beginning. It wasn't a secret or anything, but I didn't really care at all. She didn't feel scary to me. She just felt emotional and unable to deal with it. And that actually highlights the main problem I had with this episode. The fact that Kathleen isn't intimidating, she isn't scary, makes the entire group not scary. In the game, the hunter sequences are scary because they feel more deadly than the infected. The humans are harder to kill, and it's easier to be killed by them. They're also way more observant than the infected, so it's much more difficult to remain undetected when sneaking through an area. And this entire sequence in the show is trying to set up this resistance group to feel the same way. Even at the very beginning of this episode, they try to foreshadow that humans are the greatest enemy out there. Infected are stupid, have no ambitions, and are easily outnumbered. But it's the humans that are the biggest threat because they're smart and they have motivations that clickers don't have, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to survive. And actually, come to think of it, they were making this point in episode 3 as well, when Joel first tells Ellie that he's not looking out for infected, but rather for other people. So they spent 2 episodes building up the humans as being the biggest and scariest enemy, but then we get Kathleen and her passive right-hand guy, Perry. I get that they were trying to make the bad guys more relatable to show that they're just people trying to survive too, but I don't know. I don't feel like it really worked as they hoped it would. One of the reasons that the hunters in the game are scary is because we don't know anything about them. All we know is that they're trying to kill us. Giving them a sympathetic arc doesn't make them relatable. It just makes them a less scary obstacle to get through. Because let's face it, who actually cared in Adamsworth about Kathleen and her people? Did any of you guys feel a connection with them? Did you identify with Kathleen's revenge quest? Did any of you root for these people or feel sorry for them? I sure didn't. I mean, Kathleen prioritizes her revenge quest over a bloater in the middle of their city. She makes really stupid decisions from the get-go, and I'd honestly rather see more scenes of Joel and Ellie fighting these guys. Also, I wasn't afraid for Joel and Ellie's safety at all throughout the sequence. And yes, I know what some of you might say, that I've played the game and so I know what happens and I know when and how anyone actually does get hurt, and it doesn't happen in this sequence, and so I don't feel afraid for them because I know there's nothing to be afraid of. And maybe that's partly true, but in episode 2, when they encounter the clickers in the museum, that was tense. That scene had me on the edge of my seat, even though I knew exactly how it would play out. It was still gripping and tense and scary. But the fight between Joel and the hunters just wasn't. I never felt that sense of peril that should have been there. And throughout the time that Joel and Ellie are sneaking around in the city, I never felt nervous that they would be discovered and caught or hurt. I had expected more action, honestly, and so I was disappointed that we got so little of it. And what we did get wasn't shot in an interesting or engaging way. It was just kind of meh. The angles were weird, and we never got a good look at the guys that Joel was shooting at. I mean, you could barely even see them on the screen. So yeah, that was my biggest disappointment about this episode, other than how short it was. But this episode is still my favorite of the 4 so far, simply because of all the great Joel and Ellie scenes. And maybe we'll get some better fights in the next episode, and maybe Kathleen will finally show us that she can be the scary dictator that the show seems to want her to be. I somehow doubt it, but one should always look forward with hope, right? Or maybe they'll show us that she really isn't a great leader, and maybe they'll actually deal with the fact that she's not a great leader. I'll be interested to find out which way it goes. Anyway, Kathleen's right-hand guy, Perry, takes her to a building where the floor is sunk in. And you can hear rumbling or growling coming from underneath, and the floor moves like there's something under it pushing up. And Kathleen and Perry are terrified of it. And in case you didn't catch on to what that was, it was foreshadowing the bloater that we saw in the series trailer. In the trailer, the bloater is climbing up out of a hole in the ground, along with a lot of other infected. I'm not sure why it's underground like that, or why the floor is sinking down and the bloater is pushing up on it. Maybe we'll find out in the next episode. Anyway, in the game, there is actually a bloater during the sequence where Joel and Ellie are in Pittsburgh, but it wasn't the first bloater. There was a bloater in Billstown, which they completely skipped in episode 3. And the one in Pittsburgh is lurking in the basement of the hotel that we don't see here in this episode because they moved that hotel to episode 2 and there were no infected there in the show. So not sure where the bloater is actually hiding in this episode. Maybe there's a basement under the building or a subway or something. I don't know. There are more bloater encounters in the game after this, but chances are this will be the only bloater in the show. I heard somewhere, but I can't confirm it, so don't quote me on it, that the show will only have 4 episodes with infected in them. 4 out of 9. So they won't likely have more than one bloater, but there are confirmed reports that they will have a new kind of infected that wasn't seen in the game. So that will probably be freaky. Maybe a final boss last episode or something. Anyway, I look forward to finding out about that. Anyway, Joel and Ellie climb way too many flights of stairs to get to the top of a skyscraper so they can get a view of the area and figure out the best way to go to get out of the city. And boy, oh boy, Joel, do I feel your pain or what? Hiking up 33 flights of stairs. No, thank you. Joel and Ellie have a couple more serious conversations during this scene. Ellie asks Joel how he knew the guy on the road before the ambush wasn't really injured. And Joel says because he's been on both sides. And this conversation is one they have in the game too. And then, after they lay down to rest for the night, Joel asks Ellie what she meant when she said that it wasn't her first time hurting someone. And she says she doesn't want to talk about it. And he again tells her that it's not fair that she had to go through that at such a young age. You can see that Joel is rather troubled by this, so much so that he bothers to bring it up again. It disturbs him a lot that a girl her age hasn't managed to maintain her innocence in that world. And I know he's thinking about Sarah and what might have become of her in that world had she survived to be Ellie's age or even older. He probably can't imagine his little girl killing someone, and it breaks his heart that Ellie has been forced to do stuff like that. And then after this talk, we get the best moment in the entire episode, in my opinion.
Joel, did you know diarrhea is hereditary? It runs in your genes.
That is so goddamn stupid.
You laughed, motherfucker.
I didn't laugh.
Yes, you did.
I've seen some people comment that this scene felt weird to them. It was weird to see Joel laugh, since he doesn't laugh in the game. They can imagine him smiling, maybe doing a soft nose snort or something, but full on belly laughing, especially when it seemed disproportionate to the humor of the joke. Nah. But, I totally disagree. Joel's laughter in this scene isn't humorous, it's cathartic. It's that kind of laughter that you just can't help because it's so sudden and unexpected and has come after so much heartbreak and stress and life-threatening situations. After all that, you just need to release the stress of it all. And laughter like that can be triggered by the tiniest thing that other people wouldn't necessarily think so funny to warrant it. It's a healing kind of laughter, and Joel really needed it. I wonder how long it had actually been since he laughed like that. Chances are it was when Sarah was still alive. And that's just a testament to how good Ellie is for Joel. They need each other. She needs his protection and the sense of security that gives her, and he needs her lightheartedness and joy for life. They're learning from each other, learning to be more than who they are. And I think the show is doing a fantastic job showing us that. The final scene has Ellie waking Joel up in the middle of the night, and they're being held at gunpoint by a guy and a kid. And these are Henry and his little brother Sam, who are in the game. And of course, the episode ends right here. So we have to wait a whole week to see what happens next. I honestly have a hard time predicting it. I mean, I know what happens in the game, but so far the show has deviated quite a bit from the game. And so it's hard to predict what will happen, but I am looking forward to finding out. I'm about to wrap up this review, but I just wanted to point out a few small things I liked, as I did in the previous episodes too. I loved seeing more game mechanics in the show, with Joel boosting Ellie up to squeeze through a small window so she can unlock a door from the inside, or squeezing through a small hole in the wall to move something heavy that's blocking the door. So much of that kind of thing happens in the game, and I love that they put a little bit of it in the show. Joel's love of coffee. I like that they added that too. It's a small thing, but it's part of his character in the game, and there's a running joke about it in both games. And in the game, Ellie hates coffee, and she does in the show too. I love the tiny details that you might not notice on a first viewing. Like when Ellie and Joel crash their truck into the laundromat, Joel immediately leans down to check if Ellie's legs are injured, and he frantically asks her if she's all right. I can imagine that he had a terrible flashback to when he and Sarah were in a crash on Outbreak Day and Sarah broke her ankle. He was really worried that it had happened again. And the fact that Ellie noticed that Joel doesn't hear very well out of his right ear, and it concerns her that he won't hear an enemy sneak up on them at night. And every time he goes to sleep, he lays on his right side so his good ear is facing up. But on the night that Henry and Sam sneak up on them, Joel had turned over in his sleep onto his left side, and so he couldn't hear it, even though he had put broken glass around the area. Such a small detail, but they thought to put it in there. So I thought that was cool. I still think there is a lot of hope for this series yet, if this episode is any indication, and despite the disappointment of episode 3. If they keep going on the same track, then I think the rest of it will be great too, and I am very much looking forward to it. And that's it for this video, you guys. Tell me what you thought of episode 4 and the changes that were made to it from the game. I'd love to discuss it with you guys down in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be thrilled if you gave it a like, as it really helps out this channel and it shows me that you watched it. That's the only way I know if you watched it. I'm looking forward to reviewing episode 5 for you guys next week. And until then, remember to play safe, play nice, and have fun. See you guys later.